watching International News Desk and Equa Television International. Good evening, I am Lois Dureki. On tonight's news, crack starts to emerge in Russia's media as Ukraine advances. Hong Kong experienced hottest day in September following intense heat wave. The West Bank cities are the middle of resistance to Israel. Myanmar post-coup abuses a major focus, United Nations detective says, and Sudanese refugees in Chad face difficulties to deliver education. The official state-run media in Russia, which influences the country, has shifted tones numerous times throughout the Ukrainian crisis, from refuting the attack was to take place at all in early February to praising the righteous denazification of Ukraine. Generally likened with the first few months of the war, focus has faded into the background. State TV mentions the war less and less, while denazification, one of the stated goals of Moscow's special operation, hardly gets mentioned at all, according to a new study. More publicity is dedicated to simple entertainment, as opposed to the tenacious political programming seen in February and March. On September 6th, however, Ukraine started a counter-offensive in the Kharkiv region, retaking numerous major towns and occupied territory. This reportedly followed a weeks-long focused Ukrainian deception campaign of leaked exclusive reports designed to deceive Russia into thinking the strategy was to recapture Kherson to the south. At the beginning, pro-Russian bloggers and media outfit understated Ukraine's advance. By the following day, however, there was a sullen tone. Don't expect good news today, veterans notes warned. The government and its responsive voices in the media have reorganized that Russian forces have withdrawn from former held positions but have evaded outwardly calling it a loss. Igor Konashenkov, Ministry of Defense spokesman, for instance, announced saying the choice was made in order to send forces from Balaklia and Izium and strengthen the Donetsk region, which is being held by separatists. Meanwhile, pro-Kremlin blogger Yuri defined it as an opportunity to regroup. The state-owned Gazeta newspaper made no mention of the increases by Ukraine on Sunday, instead claiming that Ukraine suffered 4,000 fatalities between September 6th and 10th. There are some reports of Ukrainian attacks being thwarted on the Kharkiv Oblast Oskil River, and though an inquisitive reader might conclude that just how far the Ukrainians have come, this detail is not watered down. Instead, Gazeta and other pro-Kremlin commentators have proposed that Ukraine's push may have been enhanced by outsiders joining the fray. For September alone, Hong Kong has broken 2 heat records in a little over a week, the city's weather observatory has said, as the Asian financial hub struggles through one of its hottest summers. On Tuesday afternoon, a temperature of 35.4 degrees Celsius, 95.7 Fahrenheit, was recorded, the Hong Kong Observatory said, once again breaking the record for highest temperature in September since the city began keeping notes in 1884. The earlier hottest September day of 35.3 degrees Celsius, 95.5 degrees Fahrenheit was set just last Monday, plunging a record that had stood since 1963. The observatory website on Tuesday carried a prolonged heat alert and advised the public to drink sufficient water. If feeling unwell, take rest or find immediate help. If necessary, seek medical advice as soon as possible. Last month, southern China stated its lengthiest incessant period of high temperature since the record started over 60 years ago. The high temperature and drought conditions led to power cuts and water shortages that have hit the country's agricultural and manufacturing sectors. Experts have said the intensity, scope and duration of the heat wave in southern China could make it one of the most intensely recorded, with temperatures regularly hitting up to 40 degrees Celsius to 104 degrees Fahrenheit in several provinces last month. Extremely humid Hong Kong, with a population of some 7.6 million people, has experienced less sweltering heat than the Chinese mainland, but the city has still sizzled through an intense summer. July was the city's hottest month on record, while the average temperature from June to August was 29.2 degrees Celsius, 84.5 degrees Fahrenheit, making it the 4th hottest summer so far. The high temperatures have been particularly grueling for the 220,000 poorest residents of the city who live in overcrowded rooftop huts or tiny section apartments and caged homes that often have limited or no air conditioning. Now, Israeli military attacks and killings have become virtually a daily reality in Jenin and Nablus over the past year. The raids are part of a campaign Israel calls Break the Wave, under which it carries out a large number of arrests and killings in places such as the two northern occupied West Bank cities, targeted at fighters associated with armed groups such as the Palestinian Islamic Jihad's PIJ Al-Quds Brigades and Fatah's Al-Aqsa Matthias Brigades. The campaign is targeted at destroying a growing shift towards a progressively organized Palestinian armed resistance in Jani and Nablus that appeared in May 2021. It started in occupied East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood and led to Israel's war with armed groups in Gaza. However, Israel's military campaign started shortly after a string of raids by Palestinians that murdered 19 people in Israel between March and May 2022. Two of the men who carried out the attacks were from Jenin. Break the Wave is not just limited to attacks. Israel's three-day assault on the blocked Gaza Strip in August, in which 49 Palestinians, including 17 children, were killed, was also conducted as part of that campaign. In Jenin, the Israelis have found a skilled adversary, a group known as the Jenin Brigades, which has carried out shootings on Israeli military checkpoints and participates in armed clashes during Israeli raids. Now, when the Israelis enter Jenin, they are not just met by rocks, but by bullets too. The group, largely supported by the PIJ, but also includes young men from Hamas, Fatah, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, has come to pose a substantial challenge to the Israeli occupation. They first appeared in September 2021 in an attempt to guard 6 Palestinian prisoners from Jenin who had gone on the run after breaking out of an Israeli jail. The head of a United Nations team investigating human rights abuses in Myanmar has said that the extent and scale of suspected international crimes taking place in Myanmar broadened dramatically during the past year as the military pursued to emphasize its control in the wake of the February 2021 coup. The United Nations established the Independent Investigation Mechanism for Myanmar, IIMM, in 2018 to examine the military crackdown in northwestern Rakhine State, which sent hundreds of thousands, mostly Muslim Rohingya, across the border into Bangladesh, is now the subject of a genocide case at the International Court of Justice, ICJ. The Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar, IIMM, targets to assemble evidence and build case files for proceedings in national, regional, or international courts. Its head, Nicholas Koumjian, told the United Nations Human Rights Council that occurrences following the coup were now also a major focus for its investigations. According to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, which has been monitoring the situation, Myanmar was thrown into crisis by the coup, which stoked a mass protest movement that has developed into armed rebellion. Some 2,273 people have been killed and over 15,000 arrested. These events have been prioritized for investigation on the grounds of a preliminary assessment of the gravity of the crimes concerned, including their scale, nature, manner of commission, effects on victims, and the likelihood of a court or tribunal taking jurisdiction over the crimes in question. Koumjian said in the IIMM's newest update on the situation in Myanmar, which covers the year until the end of June 2022. Referring to prior findings in the IIMM's annual report, he said there was sufficient sign that since the military takeover, crimes had been committed on a scale and in a manner that establishes an extensive and systematic attack against the civilian population, and that the geographic scope of the suspected crimes and nature of the criminality had expanded. With so much happening in Africa, the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says Sudanese refugees and their hosts in Chad are facing challenges in delivering education. Asania Ahmed Hussein is a trained psychologist but teaches now at the Al-Noor Primary School, one of the 2 schools in the camp, leading a class of over 100 children aged between 5 and 7. Asania said, "When I teach future generations, even if I don't get a financial reward, my reward comes from God. I remember a lot of what I have learned, and it helps me support teachers and students, attaching great significance to learning, which she sees as a barricade against conflict and extremism. I see some students in the school suffer from psychological trauma and family problems. During class, I can help them deal with what they are going through," she added. Originally from Nori in the Darfur region of Sudan, she arrived in Kochgenen Moras just over 2 years ago with her husband and son after fleeing intercommunal violence. She is optimistic about her future. What is essential for me is to further my higher education, get masters, and study even further to equip and develop myself. That will make me very happy. This will permit me to help people in need. For her, the construction of new classrooms is the top priority. While trees provide shade, they are not as effective at protecting students during the rainy season, she says. Around 400,000 Darfur refugees have lived in Chad since the conflict started closely 2 decades ago. Kochigene Mora camp hosts around 14,000 Sudanese refugees who have fled clashes in Darfur since February 2020. More stories in Africa says in first installment of war reparations, Uganda pays Democratic Republic of Congo $65 million. Uganda has compensated the Democratic Republic of Congo $65 million damages for the attack and looting by Uganda People's Defense Forces, UPDF, during the Congo War between the late 1990s and 2003. This conflict involved up to 9 African countries, including Uganda and Rwanda, which backed rebel groups in the mineral-rich east of the country. Uganda's Finance Ministry spokesman Apollo Munginda on Monday affirmed the news, which had been announced by DRC's Justice Minister during a cabinet meeting on Friday. The UN's Apex Court ruled in February this year that Uganda should pay its neighbor $225 million for loss of life, $40 million for damage to property, and $60 million for damage to natural resources. The money is to be paid in 5 installments of $65 million, beginning on September 1st this year and every September 1st for the following 4 years. Kinshasa had originally asked for $11 billion, but the International Court of Justice, ICJ, ordered Uganda to pay $325 million. Hospital chief says air attack hit Ethiopia's region capital. According to a hospital official, an air attack has wounded 1 person in Mekelle, the capital of Ethiopia's beleaguered Tigray region. The raid on Tuesday hit the business campus of Mekelle University and Demet Siwoyan TV station, which is run by the regional Tigray government, according to Kibron Gabrielasi, the chief executive officer of Ada Hospital. He cited a witness who came to the facility with a wounded man, according to reports. There was no instant comment by Ethiopia's federal government, which has been fighting Tigray's regional government since November 2020. Spokesperson for the regional government, Getachew Reda, said on Twitter, the business campus has been struck by drones and accused the Ethiopian government of being behind the air attack. The developments come days after Ethiopia's Tigray rebels said they were prepared to take part in peace discussions led by the African Union AU, eliminating any hindrance to possible talks with the government to end nearly 2 years of fighting. There was no immediate comment about the announcement from the Ethiopian government, which has long claimed that any peace process must be brokered by the Addis Ababa-based African Union. Until lately, the Tigray People's Liberation Front TPLF had strongly opposed the role of the AU's Horn of Africa envoy Olusegun Obasanjo, protesting against his proximity to Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The declaration was made amidst an outbreak of international diplomacy after fighting flared in August for the first time in months in northern Ethiopia, ruining a humanitarian truce. Fighting broke out between forces of Tigray and central government forces around the town of Kobo. The fighting marked the end of a ceasefire observed in March. Since November 2020, when Abiy deployed troops to Tigray, the fighting has displaced millions of people, pushed parts of the region into famine, and killed thousands of civilians. Now, dozens injured in stadium rush as Kenya swears in President Ruto. Many people have been injured as crowds tried to force their way into the stadium where Kenya's President-elect William Ruto was sworn in, according to reports. Videos displayed hundreds of people climbing a wall to gain entry to the 60,000-seat Kasarani Stadium in Nairobi, which crowded with spectators before dawn on Tuesday. Ruto supporters dressed in his party colors of yellow and green, dancing and waving tiny national flags as a band played music from the podium. Nonetheless, lots of people were seen falling on top of each other at one entrance gate, while first aid respondents carried people to a waiting ambulance. The stadium was filled to capacity at 5 a.m. That's 2 o'clock GMT, and urged Kenyans to follow the proceedings from home, police spokesman Bruno Shioso said. Ruto took the oath of office around 2 p.m., 11 o'clock GMT on Tuesday, 5 weeks to the day since the August 9th election that saw him clinch a thin win over his rival, Raila Odinga. Volunteers lead desperate bid to reach PNG quake survivors. Airlift to isolated areas of Papua New Guinea have been operating non-stop as volunteer rescuers try to reach survivors who remain stuck 2 days after a powerful 7.6 magnitude earthquake. The quake, which hit on Sunday at about 9:45 a.m. local time, 23:45 GMT Saturday, has killed no less than 7 people and destroyed infrastructure and private property, though the precise scale of the disaster is only gradually starting to appear, relief workers said. Tremors were felt some 500 kilometers, 310 miles away in the capital of Port Moresby. Pilot Jorgen Rue, the owner of Manalos Aviation Limited, said, according to reports on Tuesday, that he had lost count of the number of medical evacuations he had carried out since the earthquake hit. With government resources inadequate, much of the rescue effort has been carried out by small private companies and volunteers. Of those rescued, the youngest person was 2 years old, Rue said, adding that the girl, who had a broken skull, had survived after emergency surgery. The pilot said his company had received calls straight from people in need of evacuation, adding that in Papua New Guinea, if you don't help yourself, no one will help you. The International Federation of the Red Cross, Maki Agarashi, said, according to report, that it was very difficult to gain entry into several locations because of the remoteness of the affected areas. On Monday, Papua New Guinea Red Cross Secretary General Valashi Gwagliata said the region's bumpy mountainous terrain made access difficult, with the worst affected areas not accessible by car. No less than 389 houses collapsed in the town of Mandak alone, according to United Nations assessors now on the ground. The United Nations said it anticipated reports of earthquake damage to increase as staff reach other communities. And finally, tussle in Senegal's new parliament smells first session. On Monday, disagreement over debate and anger in the 14th Assembly of Senegal conveyed for the first time since the July election. Tension was high and Member of Parliament MPs extremely strong part the agenda. The 165 members of Parliament were to elect their president. However, the Assembly failed to reach a consensus on electoral process, so much that the deputies of the opposition and the presidential camp came to blows and the police were called. It's eventually Amadou Mohamed Diop, a member of the ruling coalition, who was elected. The vote was boycotted by the main opposition parties, Yewi Askanwi and Wallu Senegal, which failed to name a single candidate. The two parties struck a blow against the ruling coalition during the last election, winning 80 seats to force the President Beno Bokk-Yakaar coalition to look for allies to keep its absolute majority. MPs are elected for a 5-year period. This time, over 44% of seats are held by women, the biggest share in West Africa. A recap of major stories says crack starts to emerge in Russia's media as Ukraine advances. Hong Kong experiences hottest day in September following Int'L's heat wave. The West Bank cities at the middle of resistance to Israel. Myanmar post-coup abuses a major focus, United Nations detective says, and Sudanese refugees in Chad face difficulties to deliver education. And that's you up to date with international news stories. Remember, the simple things are also the most extraordinary things, and only the wise can see them. Have a great evening.